Thank you for having me. It seems only right to start with saying thank you. Thank you to Lewis and Andrew for inviting me to speak. It is indeed a privilege. And thank you to everyone who's taken part in worship, especially Daniel, because I feel like it's really been a touching service today and a very good start to what I have to say. I've experienced a lot of mixed emotions in anticipation of standing in front of you all, since I'm more familiar with sitting and listening. But I've also been spending weeks trying to think of something funny to say to break the ice, but I don't think humour is one of my talents, so I'm just going to get right into it. I've chosen to speak on a parable, one with different names, dependent on the translation, but familiar to you all, I'm sure. I've chosen to speak on the parable of the 3 servants, or maybe more commonly known as the parable of the talents. I've chosen this one because although it may be straightforward to some on the surface, or to most of you, it is one that I've recently seen a wealth of lessons in, and it has given me great encouragement since. So let me read the English Standard Version for you now, and then I will share some of my thoughts with you. So the parable of the talents is in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30, so feel free to follow along. That's Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. He then went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But the master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I scatter no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should receive what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In this passage, a man gives money to his servants and expects them to use it in his absence to make some profit. He gives each servant different amounts, dependent on their ability. The 2 servants with the highest amount go to work and double their money. However, the one with the least buries his money for safekeeping. When the master returns, he's pleased with the servants that have made him more, and furious with the one who has cautiously hid his talent. When I first heard this parable when I was much younger, I couldn't understand why the master was so furious. I used to think he should be praised for being cautious with the money, for not recklessly spending it, potentially losing it all in a dodgy deal and not getting anything for it. I used to think that he was being respectful, guarding the money, ready for his master when the man returned. However, I have come to realize that this servant is also being disobedient, since he was encouraged to spend the money that he was given freely. The servant who was afraid and possibly doubted his ability had let fear get the better of him. He has wasted his opportunity to use the money to make a profit, and it has been taken off him and given to another more capable. Maybe he wasn't as clever as I originally thought. It is the translation of this parable that has inspired me because it uses the word talent. I believe it is no coincidence that the word talent means something else in English, and I want to explore this further. But firstly, let's look at the context of this passage and find out how much money a talent would be worth today. I found it really interesting looking into this, and I think that having this insight has made the parable even more fascinating to me. I believe a talent to be a measurement rather than an amount. Therefore, its value would change depending on what type of coinage you were weighing. I've checked different resources to try and find reliable information, one of which has been William Barclay's commentary. And it says, the most common metal involved was silver, and the value of a talent of silver was considerable. It was worth about 15 years' wages for a working man. 15 years. A website called Learn Religion states that the talent was the heaviest or largest biblical unit of measurement for weight, equal to about 75 pounds or 35 kilograms. Imagine having 35 kilograms of silver given to you, and that's just the one talent. By this measure, 5 talents would have been equivalent to 82 years' worth of wages. The first servant also went on to make 5 more, so he ended up with 10 talents, which is equivalent to 165 years' worth of wages that he would have earned working for his master. I find that absolutely incredible that he was given that much and ended up doubling what he earned. So now we can read over this, story with a new understanding and see how generous the master was who gave the talents, since it says they were given. They were not loaned. The master, although he expected them to make money, he gave them freely, which was indeed very generous. In training to be a Methodist local preacher, not minister at all, true to the name, they advocate using methods when examining verses from the Bible, and I've used these to help me compile what I want to say today and have somewhere good to start. So there are many questions that they advise asking yourself when you look at a verse. And one of them that I found most helpful is, are the characters that are named real people or are they caricatures? So in this parable, I tend to relate the master who goes on a journey to Jesus, which I found many other people do. From this, many ideas have evolved, which I'd like to share with you all. That God is wise. The master in the parable, who knows his men, gave the servants responsibility according to their abilities. He didn't give them too much, something too difficult. And in the same way, God knows us and what we are capable of. I have a fridge magnet that says, Lord, help me remember that nothing is going to happen today that you and I can't handle together. Often we can fear what we don't know, or worry that when we try something new, we may fail. But God encourages us to work with him and not depend on our own strength. Working with him, we may find ourselves more capable than we originally thought. And not just that, God also gives us all different talents and abilities. None of the servants received the same amount of talents, and it's not what talent they had that matters, but how they used them. The first 2 servants seemed equally as capable, since they both doubled their gifts, but had different amounts to work with in the first place. God is generous. We have seen how abundantly generous God is from how much a talent is worth, not forgetting that the master gave them his own resources. He didn't expect them to use their own money to make more. He freely gave his own for them to use. During COVID, and I'm sure we're all sick of hearing that, but I'm going to say it. During COVID, we saw copious amounts of things being bought in fear that supermarkets would run out. I won't go there, but my point is this. Unlike Tesco's supply of toilet roll, God's generosity will never run out. Obedience is important. The man is pleased with his first two servants, since they have done what he has asked of them. He says to them, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." It is clear from many of the passages in the Bible that Jesus wants us to keep his commandments. As we learned from Luke chapter 6, verse 49, "But anyone who hears my words and does not obey them is like a man who built his house without laying a foundation. When the flood hit, the house fell at once. What a terrible crash that was." Obedience allows us to build a solid foundation for our faith, where God can strengthen us when the storms in our lives rage. To be obedient is not to become restrained to a set of rules, but as a guide to help us strengthen our relationship with Jesus. And lastly, God builds relationships. God enriches our lives through relationships. The master could have spent his talents himself, but instead he entrusted his work to his servants, giving them the opportunity to contribute to his property and be blessed through it. In the Bible, we see countless people being called to God's will and as a result, blessing others. When I started to train as a local preacher, my minister gave me a book to help me start my learning. That book was called Red Moon Rising, and it describes how the 24/7 prayer movement in Britain started, and it surprised me to look into what other fascinating Christian literature I could learn from. Since then, he's written another book, Dirty Glory, which continues from the adventures in Red Moon Rising, and there was a quote from that book when I was thinking on this point that I wanted to read you all. Pete Greig says that generally God prefers to bless people through relationships, allowing money to flow from person to person through generosity and merit. 9 times out of 10, therefore, God chooses to provide for our needs, whether financial, medical, or emotional, naturally through people, not supernaturally through angelic visitation or manna from heaven or cash materializing in cupboards, which was from earlier in the book. But now let's look at the servants. Who are they? The two that used the talents are possibly obedient Christians, but I was a bit stumped at exactly who they could represent. So to shed some light on this, I have turned again to the commentary of Barclay, and according to his commentary, he mentions the useless servant in particular, and he puts it like this, that the useless servant is used here to represent the scribes and the Pharisees. There can be no doubt that originally in this parable, the whole attention is riveted on the useless servant. There can be little doubt that he stands for the scribe and the Pharisees and for their attitude to the law and the truth of God. The useless servant buried his talent in the ground in order that he might hand it back to his master exactly as it was. The whole aim of the scribes and Pharisees was to keep the law exactly as it was. In their own phrase, they sought to build a fence around the law, and any changes, any developments, any alterations, anything new to them was an anathema. Like the man with a single talent, they desired to keep things exactly as they were, and it is for that they are condemned. In this parable, Jesus tells us that there can be no religion without adventure, and that God can find no use for a shut mind. Barclay's comment that God has no use for a shut mind got me thinking. If we become stuck in our ways, we could miss an opportunity to help others, to better ourselves, or nurture our talents, or that in others. How our communities, our businesses, or churches would suffer if people didn't use their abilities, but continue to stay the same. We are blessed that our Lord is dependable, consistent, and never changes, exactly what Daniel has touched on today, giving us the stability that we need to fully trust him. And this can't be said for the rest of the world around us. God is always working within us, and if we let him, he can help change us for the better. The Pharisees wouldn't let God change them. They clung to their laws and built fences around them. Because of that, they missed out on what they could never have even imagined and missed embracing Jesus' teachings. We must be careful to not do the same. There is more we can learn from this parable, and I'm going to go back to William Barclay's commentary and just read 2 ideas that he's written about, and then I might come back to one later. I was conscious I didn't want to be reading too much, but I just found these lessons too good to miss out. So firstly, it says, it tells us that the reward of work well done is more work to do. The servants who had done well were told not to lean back and rest on their oars, but that they had done well, and that they are given greater tasks and greater responsibilities to do for their master. And secondly, it tells us that those who are punished are the people who will not try. The man with the 1 talent did not lose his talent, he simply did nothing with it. Even if he had adventured with it and lost it, it would have been better than doing nothing at all. It is always a temptation for the person with the 1 talent to say, I have so small a talent, so what can I do with it? It's not even worth trying. But for all those contributions that I can make, condemnation is for anyone who, having even just the 1 talent, will not use it and will not risk it for the common good. And so, I'm going to go back now to the English language, and the word talent isn't a measurement of weight for us, but instead it can be used to describe the gifts God gives us. So if we look at it this way as well, we could interpret this parable, as God encouraging us to use our gifts, our talents, our abilities and skills that he's given us to do work for him. God has given us all talents and abilities, and at Crindau, so many of you use them every Sunday to enrich worship. So I'm sure that this message possibly is not applicable to you, but I hope that you'll find much encouragement in it. God doesn't expect us to sit back and keep our talents to ourselves. What a tragedy if some of the great paintings hanging in galleries all over the world just never existed because the painters doubted their own ability. If hymn writers had kept their songs that God gave them to themselves, and if great speeches and sermons that inspired thousands had never been spoken because of self-doubt. God has given us talent in line with the works that he has planned for us to do. I would love to be a world-class athlete, but that's just not one of the talents God has given me. So clearly he has set me other work to do, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone here in this room. And then I'm going to quickly read one more thing, because this is something I've touched on already, but I think it's just been put so well in this commentary. It tells us that God has given us different talents. One man received 5, another 2, and another 1. It is not our talents that matters, but how much we use it. God never demands from us abilities which we haven't got, but he does demand that we should use them to the full. Human beings are not equal in talent, but they can be equal in effort. And this parable tells us that whatever talent we have, little or great, we must lay it down in the service of God. Maybe we recognize our talents, or maybe we don't. I know that when I prepared for today, I've sat with Lewis and Andrew in their living room, and I've been sharing my ideas with them, and I sort of started talking about this parable and said, I don't really know if I have a talent, actually. But Andrew was quick to compliment me and correct me on this, and I politely agreed. Now, if Owen had complimented me, I may not have reacted in the same way, and my reaction may not have been so polite, because he has much experience in how I take a compliment, because he's not in that round. Will also say to everyone, she doesn't take a compliment like this when I say nice things to her. But sometimes you can just simply see ourselves differently to how others do. We can all be hard on ourselves. I'm sure I'm not the only one. If we have insecurities, which most of us can do in something or another, it can cloud our judgment of ourselves and make us not want to recognize our abilities. If we compare ourselves to others, which, there will always be someone who can do it better. It is important for us to trust God. When he asks us to put our talents and abilities or even resources to work for him, we must do it. He has no hidden agenda. He has infinite wisdom, and he is more reliable than anything or anyone on this earth. God is incorruptible, and as Daniel said, he loves us unconditionally. We can rest assured that we can put our trust completely in our Lord and follow him obediently in all things. Our timing is not God's timing, and we must try to overcome whatever could hold us back from doing God's will, and I'm sure that talents can lie dormant in us until the time that they are needed. Fear may stop us exploring what we can do, and maybe the fear of failure can stop us using our talents. In every translation of the Bible I have looked at, I meant to look at them all, but I got fed up after 15, but I felt like that was a justifiable amount to try and make my point. In every single one I looked at, it states in one way or another that the servant was afraid, almost with the exact words, "I am afraid." This useless servant who has been given a bad reputation can indeed teach us a valuable lesson, one that I think is of vital importance and my original thought that prompted me to want to speak to you today. This servant was afraid. Fear can often hold us back from using our talents for good, and I'm sure we can all relate to a time when we were afraid. As I said earlier, we are all equal in effort, and the servant was punished for not trying. Many a time I can relate to this useless servant. It can be easier sometimes to not try and stay in your comfort zone than get out there. But we all have comfort zones, and change can be very difficult, especially when it's out of our control. But we must remember that God will be with us, and that he's given us these abilities and these talents to use, and his timing will be perfect, even if we can't see it for what it is. There is a song called "Fear is a Liar" by Zach Williams, and I'm not going to ask to sing it or quote it all to you, but there are some words in it that really stick out to me about how fear can hold us back. And it says, when he told you you're not worthy, when he told you you're not loved, when he told you you're not beautiful, that you'll never be enough. Fear, he is a liar. He will rob your rest, steal your happiness, cast your fear into the fire, because fear, he is a liar. There is some things in life that we believe we can't do. Is it because we've failed many times before, or been told again and again that we can't do something? Repeated failure can instill learned helplessness. This occurs when an individual continues to face negative or uncontrollable situation and stops trying to change their circumstance, even when they have the ability to do so. I learned about this when I went on a domestic violence course with Pobl, and it's recognised that a lot of victims of domestic abuse have that learned helplessness, which is why often they don't choose to leave, even though they could, because they've come to believe that they never will. That threat of "I will find you" is too strong, and they believe that they'll never be able to get away. It may be like a little voice in their heads, sort of stopping them leaving. And that isn't just applicable to victims. We can all have that little voice of doubt in the back of our minds telling us that we're not good enough. But Jesus gives us the wisdom and the hope to see that voice for what it is, a liar. I'm sure we have all heard the phrase, "use it or lose it." It seems that this parable teaches us that too. The servants that used their talents gained more, and the useless servant didn't use his talent and it was taken away. Let us be encouraged that if we continue to use our talents and our abilities in the service of God and for our neighbours, we can indeed increase the gifts that we have. The Bible is full of verses of encouragement, and I want to sort of leave you with that thought that whenever you can feel fear getting a hold of you, or indeed fear is a strong word, doubt, stress, anxiety, God has put so many verses in the Bible that encourage us to fear not and to reinforce the strength that we can have if we look to him. I could list them all, but I'll be here all day. So I will just leave you with the thought that maybe when you're feeling stressed, to turn to your favourite verse and let it encourage you. We do not know what the future holds or how God will plan to use us. But as Jeremiah said, and this is certainly one that encourages me, and I'm sure you all know it, in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and future." A very well-known verse to us all, I'm sure, and we all have verses that give us our own encouragement that are personal to us. But it is most important that we continue to pray to God, to ask for guidance, and to keep an open mind, especially when using our talents, so that we don't become like the useless servant. Let us remember that we all have abilities that have been given to us by God. Let us not neglect them or reject them, but that we should all use them for his glory.